Hello, everyone. This is Rick, and welcome to Astral Club. This episode is Using Astral Idents. Before we get into it, just want to mention Patreon. If you'd like to support the channel and its work in spreading the knowledge of astral projection and similar topics, you can do so. And when you do so, you get advanced episodes on Sunday, a library of downloaded episodes for your podcast app, and of course, a Patreon email where we can talk back and forth and you can ask questions. If you're interested, there will be a link in the description. Next up, lessons. If you'd like to learn to astral project, I'd be glad to work with you. The great thing about a private lesson is you can talk freely, share your fears, experiences, without worrying about the comments section judging you. Although, of course, our commenters are infinitely better than the average commenter on YouTube. But sometimes you just really have one-on-one type questions that you need to get answered. And it's an experience that can help you to learn to astral project. At any rate, if you'd like some information, just go to the description section and you can send me a request for info in that email. Okay, idents. Now, Robert Monroe, the famous author of Journeys Out of the Body, published in 1972, and my first astral projection book. Robert Monroe mentions the word ident. Now, he created a number of different words to describe various things on the astral because there isn't necessarily an English word that currently exists or existed that would exactly encapsulate the meaning that Mr. Monroe is trying to convey. And I think he did so with more or less success. Idents is a term that you'll hear from me all the time. And what it simply is it is an established point in time-space. It's how you get back to somewhere you've been before by zeroing in on that ident to return to that place in time. Now, I wish I could give you a better explanation. If we could communicate telepathically, I could give you an exact one that you could use to start projecting to specific points in time and space immediately. Unfortunately, though, that's just not practical, so we have to use the clumsy English language as best we can. So, how do you go about practicing zeroing in on an ident, even if you haven't astral projected as of yet? Well, there's a couple of different things that you can do, and I'll tell you about an experience that I just had last night that kind of freaked me out a little bit because I didn't think it would be possible to do what I did. And I'll share that with you in a minute because this is going to be a short episode. To practice trying to get the idea of an ident, go into a familiar room, let's say your bedroom, and sit in your bed in a comfortable position. Look around your room, take all the visuals in very well. Get a very, very good idea of what's going on. And typically, that's not the biggest problem because you're used to using your eyes to bring in information. And for most of us, it's our primary sense that we use to process the world. But what I also want you to do is to close your eyes once you've gotten, of course, a good visual in your mind. And that is use your other senses, hearing, smell, touch, and try to expand them and get the feeling of that room. You don't have to use taste, not unless you're into latex paint, in which case you do you. But for everyone else, the other senses are sufficient. What you're trying to do here is create a 3D map of a time and place. In this case, your bedroom, let's say at noon on a particular day and time. And that's how you capture an ident. Now, the one missing component here that I find is a very crucial component to the process is you have to link the event or the ident to emotion. Emotion is an extremely important component in really capturing an ident and being able to get back there again. I can't exactly quantify it, but it just seems like those emotional places establish in some way that I don't quite understand a link to you. And essentially what you're doing in this process, especially when you're using these emotions, and it could be any kind of emotion. It could be a sad emotion. It could be a happy emotion. It could be a middling emotion. It doesn't matter. But an emotional response should be part of the ident because it provides, I think, in some way, some ethereal link, a spider web, if you will, something, some strand that connects you to that time and place invisibly. And what you're doing by zeroing in on this ident using all the information that you collected, whether you were in the physical at the time or whether you were in the astral at the time. Now, certainly it's easier in the astral to collect information like I just talked about, because when you're in the astral, you don't have your physical body interfering with everything. You know, you're trying to concentrate and all of a sudden your bladder kicks in and says, hey, I don't care what you're doing, but you got to pay attention to me now. See, without your physical body, it's infinitely easier to grab an ident. And certainly emotions aren't a problem either, because remember, the astral plane is alternatively called the emotional plane. So emotions are also, can be very easily captured and can indeed be strong on the astral. So all of these things together, capturing the essence of the place and time you are, connecting it to some sort of a powerful emotion is crucial in using idents to go to places where you've been in the past, either in the physical or the astral. So, is there any other way that you can perhaps capture an ident? Until yesterday or last night, I wasn't sure that there was. But I found myself looking at some pictures from an old trolley system that used to run near where I grew up. Most trolleys no longer exist. They were deemed unprofitable. And normally by the 50s, they went out of business because people wanted to use their cars. For anybody, certainly among the younger people, if you've ever seen that the trolley in San Francisco, no, it doesn't run like a typical trolley, but that's what they used to look like. In essence, it was public transportation, and it ran on what was called trolley tracks, which were kind of miniature train tracks. And you would pay a nickel in the early days of the use of the trolley, and it would take you to a variety of different stops. This was before buses. It was one of the main sources of public transportation for many years, starting in the 20th century, and as I said, pretty much going out of business by the mid 20th century, because the companies weren't publicly funded; they were all private. And when they found that they were losing money and they couldn't collect it in raising fares because people had their cars and they weren't so great on riding the trolleys anyway, so they went out of business. So anyway, I'm looking at this picture and something clicked in me. And I suddenly realized as I stared at this picture, now it was a black and white picture of a trolley going through a forest. But it was a very, very clear black and white photo. And I found myself drawn into it. And I had this distinct feeling of being there before. And I felt an emotional response, and it felt like homesickness. I went down to the bottom caption of the photo, and I realized that this photo was taken by someone who was standing in the woods, which was not very far at all from what would one day become the neighborhood that I was raised in. And that I indeed would one day discover little portions of these tracks myself. Keep in mind, this had been several decades after it closed down, so the vast majority of traces of the tracks were buried. You allow a woods for any length of time to be absent from human intervention, and they'll change pretty quickly, and they'll cover over tracks and everything else. I just remember the first time as a kid, there had been some sort of rainstorm and lots of erosion had happened. And a few feet section of these rails was unveiled to me. And that was the first time I had discovered their existence. And I asked my parents, and they said, oh, yeah, the old trolley used to go through this area. There was nothing really in that area at the time. My neighborhood hadn't been constructed yet. There were still woods. But it would go over this hill, and then it would go down to some of the smaller settled communities. The bottom line is that I kept on staring at this picture. And it was so realistic to me that I found myself standing where that photographer must have stood. And I really felt like I was there too. And that emotion of homesickness washed over me. And I thought to myself, would this be a good enough ident? I don't know. I was skeptical, okay, because I'd never tried anything like this before. I went to bed, and when I, projected, I recaptured that picture and the emotions that I felt and tried to project myself back to where it was taken. And to my immense surprise, after I regained consciousness, is I found myself in that time and place with that trolley coming down the tracks and passing me as I watched invisibly. And I realized that I had managed to absorb an ident from a picture solely from staring at it for a good length of time and having a strong emotional response to it. So there's another way to possibly get your hands on an ident. So let's say you've got a picture of your birthday party at age 10, and preferably something memorable happened, positive or negative, such that you have a distinct emotion connected with that place and time. If so, give it a shot. If you're an established astral projector, you just might be able to return to it. Now, of course, you're going to be an unseen ghost, so, you're not going to be able to blow out those candles, okay? All you can do is watch. At best, you might be able to get a little communication going on with your subconscious, but once again, talking with your subconscious isn't that much different from talking to a wall. But there you are. The bottom line, though, is that's an ident, and that's how you use an ident, and how you perhaps can even create one that didn't currently exist. I mean, I went to a place in time that I had never been to, but I was able to capture the essence of this beautifully clear and realistic black and white photo along and connect it with I guess, the ident that I had from when I was, well, probably about 20 or so years later. So I was able to connect the two, establish that strong emotion, and then actually use it to return to that place and time by using that photo and my emotion as a curious ident. Well, if you found that interesting, please hit the like button, share it with those of like minds. Subscribe if you haven't already, and well over 80% of you have subscribed, which by YouTube standards is incredible. I think the average channel is 10%. And questions and comments. Do you have any places that you'd like to go back to and you have strong emotions in maybe a picture too? Or you have any other questions? Share your experiences. And as always, this is Rick, and I will see you on the astral plane.